Hello, my name is Colette Canute, and I am the president of the League of Women Voters of Huntington. I welcome all of you tonight. I think that you'll find that this night will be particularly valuable in this special election. I'd like to start by saying that the League of Women Voters has been and always will be nonpartisan. That means that we do not support or oppose a particular political candidate or political party. Tonight's debate is held in that spirit. Each of the candidates will have an opportunity to respond to the same questions. All of you have an opportunity to submit questions, which will be vetted by these ladies that are sitting at this table. We look for redundancy. We also try to make sure that no questions are incendiary. I also would like to have you notice that the League of Women Voters is videotaping this Meet the Candidates night. Only the League is authorized to videotape or audiotape the proceeds of this event. Only with the permission of the League will you be able to do that, and that includes the use of any type of recording device. Yes, that does include your cell phone. Now, I should also say that the video should be available tomorrow, possibly as early as tomorrow, on the League of Women Voters of Huntington's YouTube channel. We also post it on our Facebook, give you a link to our YouTube. As always, our videos are presented in their entirety. Both candidates' campaigns have agreed to these rules. I want to thank both Mr. Stern and Ms. Smitelli for gracing us with your appearance. We look forward to your responses to our questions. Before we begin, I'd like to ask the president of our co-sponsor, the Huntington Township Chamber of Commerce, Ryan Udowicz, to say a few things about the chamber.
Thank you. On behalf of the Chamber of Commerce, Board of Directors, staff, and members, I want to thank you all for coming tonight. This is a very important evening because we're going to get to learn what the candidates feel. At this point also, I do want to say that we really should give the League of Women Voters a big hand for what they're doing. They worked extremely hard to put this on, and it's going to be a very interesting and fact-finding night. I want to wish both candidates the best of luck. I know that the Assembly District and the people of the state of New York will do well with either. They're both wonderful people. But from that, I'll turn it back to the League of Women Voters to get this moving.
Thank you very much for your Mr. Udowicz, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Everyone please stand.
Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, and I'd like to introduce our moderator, Lisa Scott. She is the president of the League of Women Voters of Simcoe County, ILO. Thank you,
Thanks so much, Colette. I just want to reiterate a couple of things about the order and how this all works. Both candidates, as Colette said, have agreed to the structure of the debate, and the whole idea is to listen to the candidates. That's why we take questions on the index cards, so that we can get to the topics right away. Because unfortunately, for every 9 people who do have really good questions, there tends to be a person that wants to make a statement. And there is a place for that, but it's not at this kind of candidates meeting. So you're encouraged. There is no limit to the number of cards you can give these ladies. And what they're doing is sorting them, as Colette said, particularly by topic. What I try to do with the questions is group things by topic so that if there's a second or third question on that topic, I will ask it in succession so we kind of deal with that topic rather than bounce around all over the place. The candidates will each get 1 minute for their opening statement. They've drawn lots. And who will go first? Ms. Smitelli will go first. And then Mr. Stern. Then I'll ask the first question. It would start with Mr. Stern, and Ms. Smitelli would answer. And we'll go back and forth that way. I'll keep track up here. They each also have a piece of red construction paper. This is a red card debate, which means that they will be allowed a certain number of rebuttals. They each answer each question, but sometimes the person who answered first either wants to respond to something in the answer of the second person or has an issue with something that was said, so they can exercise their red card. They will be allowed to use them 5 times. The debate will be pretty quick moving because they're only going to get a minute. This is what was agreed to, 1 minute to answer the question, and then a rebuttal is 30 seconds, so it's really to make the point. They, however, will be taking notes, and I'm sure in their closing statements, they'll be going back to the topics that they want to emphasize the most about their reason for wanting you to choose them in this election. Also, I'm really, really happy that there are a bunch of you here. Special elections are tough. Nobody ever knows when they are because they're on a different day every year. This year, as you know, it's April 24th. But I believe there are only 2 in Suffolk County, so you won't read about them a lot. And even people that are regular voters will frequently say, I didn't get a card, I don't know. So please, if you're in this district and aren't here just to have an alternative evening, please tell your neighbors and friends who live in the district too to turn out, because it's important that the people's voices be heard. And without further ado, we'll start. So again, 1 minute for an introductory statement. Ms. Smitelli?
May I stand?
For the introductory, yes. After that, I'd ask that you both sit. And test the mic, make sure you're, because it's being recorded, so you have to be pretty close.
Okay.
You just will take it out.
Okay.
Yeah. Slightly kind of out.
Hello, hello. All right, good evening. This is a little daunting, but I'm up for it, My name is Janet Smitelli, and I want to be your next Assembly person for the 10th Assembly District. So good evening, and I'm so glad that you're here because this means that you care, and this means that you're going to go back to your neighbors, your friends, people that you live with, people that are all around you, and tell them to get out and vote on April 24th. Why you should vote for me? Well, first of all, I've been thinking about this for a while now. I've worked in the private field for 30 years. I'm an attorney handling all aspects of civil litigation. I also am a mom, a citizen, a taxpayer. I've worked with many youth in an organization called Boy Scouts. I've also worked with religious organizations and other civic organizations as well. Over the years, I've taught civics. And in teaching civics, you teach what is important to be a good citizen and what are your rights and duties as a citizen. And as the years progressed, I became more and more frustrated and angered, which was with what was going on. I became upset about the lack of transparency, about corruption in government, and I know that I can do better. I'm coming at this after having worked many years in the private sector. I'm coming to this position with the experience that all of you have in the community, knowing what's important to us. I'm coming at this position as an outsider, and I want to let you know what's going on every step of the way. Transparency is very important to me. Communication lines are very important to me. And I hope, that you will consider me on April 24th. Thank you.
Mr. Stern? 1 minute and a scooch, too. The timer is back there. Diane, you want to raise your hand, too? Yeah, okay.
And that's that bill. Okay.
Yeah, but you have a countdown, right?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Stern.
Thank you. I don't want to mess up the mic, so I'll stay seated. Good evening, everyone. I'm Steve Stern. It's good to see everybody. I am a father. I'm a husband. I am a certified elder law attorney. It was my privilege to serve my community for 6 terms as Suffolk County legislator. I'm running for the New York State Assembly to bring my passion and my experience to build on a record that I'm very proud of, particularly several legislative initiatives that literally were first of their kind in New York State and even first in the nation. And so, as your assemblyman, I will work hard to protect our taxpayers, protect the water we drink in our precious environment for now and for generations to come, to protect our families and communities from MS-13 and the scourge of the opioid epidemic. And with your support, on April 24th, I'll continue to provide open, accessible, responsive leadership, deliver real results for our community, and most importantly, make you proud. Thank you.
Okay, we'll commence with the questions. At this point, I would ask that you please not applaud, not emote. If you want to emote, go outside and emote. Because again, we want to keep things rolling along, and I don't want to have to stop the flow of thought that goes into trying to put a 10-minute answer into 1 minute. So the first question, and some of these are prepared in advance by the League of Women Voters of Huntington, so I'll start with a couple of theirs. And then juggle these. So don't think I'm not paying attention, but I'm looking at questions too. So Mr. Stern, what would be your top 3 priorities if you were elected?
My top 3 priorities, as I mentioned, my open would be protecting our taxpayers, which is something that I have plenty of experience with in my tenure as Suffolk County legislator. Protecting our precious environment for our children and our grandchildren. Our future here as an island depends on it. And fighting MS-13 and violent gangs and attacking the opioid epidemic. These are the 3 top issues that I hear from my community as I'm knocking on doors, and I knock on thousands of doors every year in the Suffolk County Legislature. We had a rule in our office, and Debbie, my former chief of staff, is here and knows as well. We had a rule of knocking on 3,500 doors every year, even in a non-election year. And these are the issues that are on the minds of our neighbors in our community. These are the issues that I have, I think, very meaningful experience in delivering results. And these are the issues that I'm looking forward to tackling as our next assemblyman up in Albany.
Okay, thank you. Smitelli, same question, 3 priorities.
Taxes. 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 Oh, sorry. I'm supposed to be speaking into this. Taxes. 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 A lot of us moved from the city or from Nassau County into Suffolk County years and years ago because taxes were lower and because we loved the open environment and many other things to raise our children in. And taxes are becoming overly burdensome. In fact, this year, we've just hit a milestone. We are the worst state for state and local taxes. And this is something very upsetting. This is something that is causing 1 million seniors to leave New York State since 2010. This is very important to us to get a handle on our taxes. We must get our house in order. Other issues that are important to me are, of course, safety, eradicating gangs in our area, making sure our schools are safe. Those are some of the important issues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We have many questions. Okay, Ms. Smitelli, first, this one goes to you. In terms of the economy, Long Island continues to suffer from a sluggish economy. What would you do to improve the quality of life for Long Islanders of all ages and socioeconomic levels?
Well, what I find is important is that sometimes more is not better. I think that there has to be plans in place that when you go to a community that is well planned out and where development is in balance with the needs of the community, then you have a beautiful environment. And I think that's something that's very important. Things that we must do is we must talk to each other, we must communicate, we must work together, but we must not overdevelop, and we must not just look at shiny new toys instead of fixing what's broken and making our environment more beautiful. What's really so striking about Long Island as opposed to other places is our waterways and is our beautiful environment, and we have to do things to keep that. And that will keep the attraction of people living here.
Thank you. Mr. Stern, same question?
Well, so much of the attraction of being here on Long Island and being able to meet the relatively high cost of living is having a good paying job, being secure in one's job, having growth opportunity in one's job, and of course requires a healthy economic development and the type of planning that goes into providing the kind of infrastructure that's necessary to house thriving businesses here, to provide an infrastructure that is attractive, particularly to our young people who want to remain here. I'm actually very proud of the fact that it was named one of the outstanding leaders in 2017 by the Melville Chamber of Commerce, which is an area of economic importance, which is critically important to us in the 10th Assembly District. And I received that award because of the things that I've done in making the Melville area attractive to important businesses. It's a thriving area, as we know. It is not an area without challenges, but it is exactly the kind of area that we need to continue to focus on, to bring in the companies, to protect the companies, to keep the companies here that provide the good paying and secure jobs, not just for today, but for tomorrow as well.
Thank you. You get 30 seconds as well.
Okay. I've worked in Melville for a couple years now, and a few years back, and I found that what happened was there were a lot of times that there was only one corridor to get somewhere. There wasn't things there to keep businesses in place, such as all the other things that one needs when one lives in an area. So it's not just jobs, it's planning the whole community, and it's putting things together the right way. Otherwise, you can't get from one place to another, you can't eat, etc.
Thank you. I'm going to keep going on the economy now, but one thing I do want to say is it's interesting because neither of these candidates is the incumbent. So you're both aiming for a job that you haven't had before. So some of the questions will be related to things that are going on in Albany, which neither one of you necessarily worked through, but your opinions, your analysis of things that have been going on is helpful. For example, the first question was on the economy. The follow-up on that is, what, in terms of the results of Governor Cuomo's budget proposal and the ultimate enactment of that budget by the Assembly and the Senate, which everyone is trumpeting responsibility for, what in that do you think is going to be helpful to the local economy? So it's a loose question. It could be something Cuomo pushed, it could be something that the Assembly or the Senate did, or something that didn't happen and should have happened in this year's, because you weren't there.
I was not there, but as a homeowner, like I'm sure many of you, I'm concerned about what was and what was not done in this past year's budget. Because we know that here on Long Island, we had an arrow aimed right at us as a result of the federal tax law. And so with the cap on the SALT deduction, that is going to be something that every one of us as homeowners, every one of us as income earners is going to feel. And so while there was an attempt by the governor and members of the legislature to have provisions to try and protect us as taxpayers, we need to do much more. And that means taking a look at how we spend at the state level and make sure that we do what we can within the state budget itself to protect taxpayers and not necessarily have to rely on what is hopefully going to be an effective shield from the effects of the federal tax law. But it didn't go nearly far enough, and what it means is that in future budgets, it's going to take some real belt tightening to bring spending under control to protect us as taxpayers going forward.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Smitelli?
Well, when I first saw the proposed budget by Governor Cuomo, I saw $1 billion requested for additional taxes, and that scared me. Then I saw the Democratic caucus proposal for the budget for this year, and it was $2 billion, and that scared the heck out of me. Right now, I think the question you asked was the final budget that was passed after all the entities involved got together, finally hashed it out. What I did like was some additional funding for schools, which was sorely needed, and which we really appreciated in this area.
Okay, thank you. And you both kind of referred to this, but let's talk about it in this question. The federal tax law rewrite. And Cuomo had put together some proposals, and it was very confusing, I think, for the general population. And there are a lot of retirees, and they're like, wait a minute, payroll tax, well, you know, how does this fit together? Can you comment on what New Yorkers might be expecting, what you wish might happen should you be elected, if you can influence something? How are we going to deal with this issue?
Well, we were all very fearful in this area because of what the federal government had proposed with respect to property. And in fact, many of us, myself included, said, let me get and pay my property taxes before December 31st, which was done. We all have yet to see what's going on there, but all the more reason why when the federal government does something, the states have to be responsive to it, and local government has to be responsive to it. And that's why it's essentially, we'll find out what's going on soon.
Okay. Mr. Stern?
Well, the Trump tax plan that is now law it's an absolute disgrace, and nothing but a giveaway to the wealthy and to powerful corporations that's going to take a direct hit on the middle class of Long Island. It's something that we all need to be concerned about. It's a $2 billion giveaway, and that's $2 billion in additional taxes that are coming from us here in New York State, and that's coming directly out of our law enforcement, directly away from our first responders, directly out of our schools. And ultimately, the only way to be able to pay for it is going to be by hitting Social Security and Medicare in the future. It's the only place that it could possibly come from. And so while the governor did have provisions in the budget to try and protect us from the hit of that going forward, we need to do more. And so, again, as I started to say before, it really is time to reimagine how New York State taxes and spends and the kinds of essential services that are going to be provided. This is exactly the kind of experience that I've had in the Suffolk County Legislature over the past 12 years, particularly during challenging times, having to reimagine the services that we provide, cutting costs along the way, consolidating services, and protecting our taxpayers at the same time.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think the last for now on this subject, people very often will say, okay, the government, right? And they're not differentiating town, village, county, state, federal probably, I think. But having moderated other debates in this auditorium, one thing I hear a lot about is development. And development and the economy, at least philosophically, a lot of people say they go hand in hand. So, Mr. Stern, the question is really for you. On a state level, where can the state actually help in this district, in the town of Huntington? Because it's very not clear.
Well, you certainly can't have the state or any other level of government just build haphazardly. It has to be done with appropriate planning. There are appropriate places to build, and there are inappropriate places to build. Maybe 90%, 95% of our area we can look at as developable, and very just a small percentage that we would consider to be actually 95% off limits to huge development, and maybe 5% where you can do some good things, particularly around our train stations and transportation centers. And that's exactly the kind of development that we had supported in the Suffolk County level of government. Smart growth, mixed use, apartments for our young people and seniors who want to stay here on Long Island, along with retail and industry and commercial, but doing it in a smart way, smart development in smart area really is key to our economic growth. Economic development, when done correctly, is a positive thing for our area.
Thank you. Ms. Smitelli?
I actually have not seen a lot of that lately. In fact, some of the pet projects that have been promoted in recent years have not been that effective and have gone essentially, they're still vacant. There's still retail space available. So some of these nice new shiny projects are not what we need. What we need is to fix our infrastructure. What we need is more money for our transportation roads and public ways so that we can not just put a nice shiny coat or have something new down the block and then have the rest of the block rumbling. With respect to overdevelopment, does not mean that tax incentives should be given to only some that have the nice, bright, and shiny things and not others. We have to be smart in how we grow and how we develop. I don't have a background in raising taxes. I think taxes should not be raised.
Okay, thank you. Yes, 30 seconds.
Well, first of all, I do have experience in not raising taxes. I'm very proud of the fact that in my 12 years in the Suffolk County Legislature that there was zero increase in county fund general property taxes. And that was with an eye on protecting the homeowner. I'm sure that the residents of the area of Wyandanch and Wyandanch Rising and those in Ronkonkoma and the Ronkonkoma Hub and living out east by Calverton don't think of economic development in their communities as a shiny toy. And we are all putting our heads in the sand and ignoring the obvious if there are areas that are just a mile away or just down the block. And if we don't come together collectively to make sure that they do well, because if they do well, we all do well. And if we let those communities just languish without economic development and a chance at opportunity, you know, the distance between us is not going to be all that great.
Okay, thank you. We have actually several questions relating to guns. So, and some of them overlap. So in this, the first one, in the aftermath of the latest mass shooting in Parkland, Florida, what is your position on gun safety? And also, another question that follows from that, do you support an assault weapons ban?
Since 1986, automatic fire guns have been banned. Recently, bump stocks have been banned. We've now gotten additional funding to increase safety. Task forces have been put in place. We're starting in the right direction towards gun safety. Just because we do have a Second Amendment doesn't mean we have an unfettered right to have all and as many guns as we like. There has to be some type of control. Those that are mentally ill and have had adjudication, those that are perpetrators of domestic violence, they should not have the right to have guns.
Thank you. Mr. Stern?
Yeah, this is a very personal issue for me. One of my dearest friends was literally texting in real time with his son as he was hiding under his desk in Parkland. He heard his best friend shot and killed in the classroom right next door. He will never be the same. This is the moral issue of our time. And it is unacceptable that our state government and our federal government continues to refuse to act on common sense gun safety measures. This is both a gun safety issue and a mental health issue, and I think reasonable people all understand that. The New York SAFE Act was a start, but I am proud to have the endorsement of Mothers Demand Action because they know that in the New York State Assembly, I will be a strong proponent of expanded background safety checks. bans on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, and it'll also support red flag procedures so that our law enforcement can be proactive in preventing tragedy before it strikes.
Okay, thank you. There's a question that flows from this, and I want to give both of you a chance to answer it. Mr. Stern touched on it. But Mr. Stern, this one says, again, gun violence is clearly on the rise in our nation, our schools, and our communities. What can you do in Albany to respond to this very important issue? You happen to have just mentioned a few things, but given the fact that journalists have talked about how sometimes the time's not right, upstate New Yorkers have different political views than downstate. What do you think can be accomplished in your first 2 years should you be elected?
I'll tell you, I hope the time is right. I hope we all recognize that the time is right for action at the state level and ultimately the federal level. And as long as members of Congress are owned by the NRA and won't act at the federal level, we have no choice in New York but to act to protect ourselves. Now, we might be able to do very little with illegal gun purchases coming over the border from Virginia and our neighboring states, but we have to do what we can to protect our children here in our home state of New York. And so, yes, I strongly support an assault weapons ban. I strongly support expanded background checks. These are common sense measures. This is not, I don't believe anyway, out in far left field kind of stuff. And I believe that the overwhelming majority, not just of our country, not just the state of New York, but my neighbors in the 10th Assembly District, hopefully agree with me that there are reasonable common sense measures that we can take to protect ourselves, most importantly to protect our children in our schools.
Okay, Ms. Smitelli?
With respect to background checks, there's recently been an expansion to 7 days for those that are requesting a pistol license or firearm license to conduct further background checks. There are also, and I think that it's extended to 7 days right now, there's also further things that we can do with respect to shared databases, with respect to those that have been adjudicated in the court system, making sure that those names are put into databases, to make sure those with mental ill issues that have been brought to the attention of the courts, that they get put in. Because background checks are only as good as all the data that one puts into it. So that is that's where we should be looking in the near future to make sure that these background checks are done well. And a lot of times we hear that so-and-so wasn't speaking to so-and-so, wasn't speaking to so-and-so, wasn't speaking to so-and-so, and that's why no one knew of this person's vicious propensity. And
okay.
This has got to stop.
Thank you. Okay, and one more follow-up on this topic. This election year is federal as well as state. And Congress has not been able to do anything along the lines of what you both are suggesting. And people talk about it being lobbyists, the NRA, in some cases the judiciary, the Supreme Court's ruling on this. And one of the issues that is going to come up in New York is reciprocal concealed carry. So if someone has the right, because of their home state regulations, to carry a concealed weapon, that all the states, in theory, might be forced to allow that according to federal law. Is there a way in New York State? Because clearly this is not something that is high on the priorities, it seems, from either party in New York State government. Is this something you think can be worked around, should this happen?
Actually, there is something in the works. First of all, New York State has what's called the SAFE Act, which is one of the harshest laws against guns in the country. And now there's proposals in place, or even bills being introduced, that if you are a non-resident and you bring a gun into this state, you must abide by the SAFE Act and abide by the licensing requirements and the requirements of New York State. And that certainly should be it. How it can be enforced is another question, and that's the reason why we need these increased databases and we need to communicate with each other.
Thank you. Mr. Stern?
Yeah, first of all, just to your point about the Supreme Court, the precedent, the case that everybody looks to, Justice Scalia even allowed that unusual weapons can and should probably be regulated by the states. And in that sense, the SAFE Act doesn't go nearly far enough to give us the kinds of protections that I hope we would expect here in New York. And a lot of work needs to be done on the SAFE Act to make it reasonable, but also to make it more expansive to protect us here in our home state. As to reciprocity, reciprocity isn't necessarily a gun permitting issue because criminals don't get permits. And so my issue with reciprocity is that in New York, if you go through the process and there are standards, there should be certification, there should be training requirements. These are the kinds of things that I would hope to have here, instructional requirements, but would not necessarily be present in other states. And I think that's the issue with reciprocity, is that in New York, if we are forced then to honor one's ability to carry, even concealed, that it won't come close to the standards that I hope we would require here in New York.
Okay, thank you. There's a question from the audience about school safety that flows right from this. First off, Mr. Stern, this starts with you. School districts, local property taxes, state has funding for schools. Who pays for school safety? Whose role is it? And what could you, as an assembly member, propose or do?
It would be the role of New York State as the primary funder of our school system. And if there are schools that, after consultation with their administration and with their teachers, with their staff, with their security, but most importantly with parents and students, develop security measures, then those are security measures that I believe strongly in local control, and that the school should have the ability to implement security measures as they see fit. I do believe that it's the responsibility of the primary funder to provide the security that our schools deem that they need. This is very personal for me. I'm the parent of 2 teenage children. One's in high school, one's in college. And their safety when they're going to class, when they should be focusing on their studies and have to keep looking over at the door, or having to worry about that dreaded alarm coming over the loudspeaker, is something that is a concern of theirs, and it's a concern of mine. And so believing in local control for our school districts, security measures that they believe is most appropriate for their community, those are the ones that we should support.
Thank you. Smitelli?
There has been talk lately of direct communication with local law enforcement, such as what they call a panic button. And that is a wonderful idea, so that if there is any problem, police and local authorities are contacted immediately. And this will increase their response time. And that's something that I've heard recently out of communications that local school and law enforcement have had recently. Additionally, with respect to schools, there is more funding that's now coming to the schools to develop programs such as that.
Okay, thank you. Huntington itself, the township now, not just your district, is very diverse. Some schools have more discretionary money than others. Some barely can have a field trip. What's your philosophy about how money should be allocated to districts, assuming that the money does come down from Albany, which is what you both said, for school safety?
Well, some of the problems that the schools find is the unfunded state mandates, which require them to do things, additional things, yet do not fund the money for that. And additionally, if a school tends to have a little bit of a high reserve fund for these rainy day expenses that come up, they're deterred from having any real amount in there. So that becomes a real problem.
Mr. Stern?
I mean, I have to believe that all of our children are precious, and it shouldn't matter whether you live on the south side of Huntington or the north side, east or west, all of our children deserve to go to school in safety and with peace of mind and to focus on their studies rather than worrying about their safety. And so, you know, I would not want to see a system that is dependent simply on reserves of a particular school, whether they can pay for it out of their reserves or not. It needs to be a state responsibility. But it is a question of unfunded mandates. And as I said before, it really is a question of making sure that we get our fair share here on Long Island, and particularly within the Township of Huntington. We have 17% of the students in the state of New York. We get back 12% in funding from Albany. That is the mother of all unfunded mandates. And whether it's an unfunded mandate for security or getting our fair share, those have to be the top issues as any member of the Assembly to make sure that, particularly when it comes to protecting our children in the schools, that we get our fair share.
Thank you. Mr. Stern, quick one. Do you philosophically think there should be armed guards in the schools, in each school?
Well, philosophically, I don't believe that we should arm our teachers. That is a recipe for disaster, and so I would be strongly opposed to arming teachers. As far as arming security guards outside the classroom or even in the perimeter, you know, it's a difficult question, particularly during these challenging times. And you know, it's something that I struggle with because it's not a cure for the challenge. It doesn't end the violence necessarily. It doesn't provide real gun safety measures, and that's the core of the problem. You want to get to the problem, you have to get to the core of the problem, and that's not it. Having said that, as a parent of a child in high school, I'm concerned, and so I'm not really ready to discount it entirely, but I would want to see a good plan in place working with superintendents, and we have several outstanding superintendents here in the town of Huntington, and their staffs, administration, and security, but most importantly, to put a workable plan in place involving stakeholders like parents and children themselves.
Thank you. Ms. Smitelli?
This depends on the school and the school district. There are retired police that are often in the schools providing security. If you are a retired policeman, you know how to treat a gun, you know how to use a gun, you know where a gun should be, you have extensive training. That's different than someone who does not have it. When you're in a school setting, there really should not be a gun unless it is warranted by the specific district, it is by someone who is highly trained. Those that are in authority know where it is, know who has it, and it's used safely. There are many people that should not have guns, should not be near guns. Those that have a gun should know exactly where to carry it, how to use it, how to conceal it, etc. It's a very dangerous instrumentality, and obviously that's axiomatic, but you need higher training for that. And as I said, it depends on the decision of the school district after discussion with people that are involved.
Okay, thank you. As an aside, the League of Women Voters works with the Suffolk County Legislature to do a student event every year, a full day kind of culminating in a mock legislature. And this is the topic they're going to be talking about in this year's event. Okay. So it'll be interesting to get their take on it. Ms. Smitelli, next question for you. There's a serious lack of educational equality in school districts on Long Island. What would you propose to address the education inequality in the region?
Well, especially in today's day and age, it's very difficult because you have many students with special needs that are now in our school system. You also have an influx of students coming in that have come from other countries with a third-grade education. So the problems that are affecting schools today are ones that we have not seen in years. So it's very difficult, and that's what I think sometimes bogs them down with respect to the education needs that they have to face. It's important to have these para-professionals and after-school activities and extra-school activities to kind of fill in the gaps that sometimes are created by this diverse group of students that we now face, such as after-school activities, such as volunteer people, such as paraprofessionals to provide extra assistance.
Thank you. Mr. Stern?
The inequality of our schools is related to many things, but directly related to the difference in funding. And you know, I would challenge anybody to be able to figure out the school funding formula at the state level. Those that are in charge of allocating the state funding on an annual basis have no idea how they come up with that state funding formula. And that's got to change. There is a lack of transparency. There is a lack of working together on a budget. And there is an inability for representatives to come back and explain to their constituents exactly what kind of funding they received and why. That is absolutely unacceptable. And that goes directly to the culture in Albany of 3 men in a room and representatives not being a part of that process. That it should be unacceptable to all of us. That is absolutely unacceptable to me. I've been part of budget process over the past 12 years and have been at that table and have worked across the aisle and then with different levels of government to provide necessary funding in all areas throughout Suffolk County based on the need and not based on some arcane formula that nobody can figure out. It's ridiculous and unacceptable.
Thank you. To continue along the vein of schools and the school-age population, gangs. There's a new police commissioner in Suffolk County who has background on this. The DA in Suffolk went to El Salvador to pool resources and learn more, and they both are saying that intelligence gathering is really what's important. What's the role of the state? We hear about the county, we hear about the school districts, we hear about the federal government. What's the role of the states in combating the threat of armed gangs like MS-13? Mr. Stern, this is yours.
Okay. Well, I think there's an important role for the state to play. In fact, several people in this room I was with earlier today at Governor Cuomo's press conference with County Executive Malone, and so we saw a prime example of the role that the state needs to play. First of all, we know that combating MS-13 and other violent gangs, particularly on our area, is really two parts. It is prevention, and then it is very strong law enforcement. Law enforcement, whether that's the county joining with our federal partners, which have had some great successes, and with our new district attorney, Tim Sini, and our new police commissioner, Jerry Hart, who used to be the director of the FBI's gang task force on Long Island. They are going to deliver some tremendous results, I have every confidence. But the state has a role to play, and the governor spelled that out today on the prevention side. All right, he signed a bill that will allocate $20 million to Long Island to use for prevention services and try and keep our young people out of the pipeline, out of the aim of the gangs who are trying to recruit them in the schools with after-school services and social services and the kind of preventive aspect that is hopefully going to prevent them from being engaged in gang activity in the first place. That's an important, critically important role for New York State to play.
Thank you. Ms. Smitelli?
Gangs are not a local issue. Gangs are not a state issue. Gangs are not a federal issue. Gangs are international. I have had the opportunity to live in Central America for 6 months. I have learned all about the problems that face young people that come here unaccompanied and with no parental units, with very little support, and they are attracted into gangs, or they're followed. And this is a real problem. As I said before, and as I say again, this is not West Side Story. There's not just one area where there are gangs. Gangs move. They move all the time. Drugs are moved into this county, and gangs are constantly on the move. It's very hard to find them. The only way to do that is to communicate. Communicate with other states, communicate within the state, and to have a system that's in place for that. It's not that easy. Once you find them, you can arrest them, but you've got to find them.
Okay, thank you. Following that, you both talked about the finances of the state in the early part of the debate. And I think the number that the governor gave was 20 million on this effort now, which is not just law enforcement, it's education, it's dealing with the school community and all of that. So starting with you, Ms. Smitelli, where's this money come from? What are we giving up? Or is this an announcement and really nothing will happen?
Well, this is where I think transparency needs to come in place. They said they've provided us with this funding and that it's going to go to combat gangs. And it's going to go to certain activities and organizations that are through the school. I'd like to see where that is. I've been calling up trying to find out what's going on there, where is it going to. I've been very involved in youth organizations for a long time. I have 3 children. My oldest is 26, my youngest is 15. And the key to keeping kids away from things like gangs and drugs is to keep them occupied and keep them active, obviously in something other than video games, which we would love, but it's very important to keep them active, and these programs should be encouraged, but the right kind of programs, and I'd love to see where this money is going, and I'd love to promote good, effective programs and not see this go to waste.
Thank you. Mr. Stern?
First of all, this is an important program, an important initiative, and it is not only to be effective on the prevention side and protecting our community from gang activity, but it also needs to be, as all budgeting needs to be, a reflection of our values and our priorities and what's so important to all of us. And you cannot have it all. Nobody is suggesting that we can have it all, but that's where governing comes in, and that's where difficult decisions have to be made. I can tell you, being on the side of that budget table every single year, when you want to accomplish A through Z, but you only have enough money to go A through E, that you have to make some really, really difficult choices. Here, the governor, I think rightfully so, has identified gang prevention funding, particularly in Suffolk County, as an important priority, and I would agree. And we say we want to fight MS-13, we say we want to protect our communities, but ultimately we have to put our money where our mouth is. But that comes from making difficult choices and determining what our values are as a community and what we determine to be our priorities. This is absolutely one of those priorities.
Okay, thank you. We mentioned drugs with the gangs, so we'll go to the question on drugs. Mr. Stern, drug overdoses continue to plague Long Island. What do you see as your role as a member of the Assembly in the future in stemming this crisis?
Across the country, 62,000 overdose deaths from opioid overdose. That's a greater number than the entire Vietnam War, to put that into perspective. It takes a full frontal assault to combat the opioid epidemic. It certainly takes education and awareness, but that education needs to be evidence-based and not just throwing darts at something that may or may not work. Of course, it takes strong law enforcement, and that is something that locally, working with our local law enforcement partners, we've had some great successes on. And of course, it takes treatment. And treatment is critically important, but I'm very proud of the fact that in Suffolk County, we have a model alternative to incarceration program that is being studied by other municipalities because of its success in the legislature. I'm proud of what we were able to accomplish. We were one of the very first municipalities to provide Narcan to our first responders, and I think last year they saved over 700 lives. I wrote the law that instituted a ban on synthetic opioids and being proactive before this stuff hit our streets.
Thank you.
And those are the kinds of measures that are effective in fighting against opioids.
Thank you. Ms. Smitelli?
Also education. We have to lead by example. The Shed the Med program is an amazing program. I defy you all to go into your medicine cabinet, make sure you don't have any drugs lying around, because believe me, they can easily end up in the wrong hands. So we must lead by example. We must get into our kids' faces. We must tell them over and over and over again how dangerous it is. And we must lead by example. It's very important to attack this problem on all ends, not just the end of Narcan, which is after someone has overdosed, reviving them, but it's all aspects. It's education, it's leading by example, it's school involvement, it's school education, it's constantly telling your kids about the dangers. And when new drugs come up, it's constantly telling them about that. And also, again, after-school activities, keeping them involved, keeping them away from harm's way. These are all very important things, and we should be not only helping them on a government level by adding funding to these areas in education and prevention, but also encouraging us to do things such as shed meds, such as Narcan training, such as getting people involved and educated.
Thank you. 30 seconds.
Yes, Suffolk County is the lead plaintiff in the class action lawsuit against the pharmaceutical companies that duped us and against medical providers that have poisoned us. And so we're very proud of taking that very aggressive approach and bringing legal action against those that have spread the poison throughout all of our communities. But I got to tell you, and I raised my flag because I'm really pleased to hear that the Shed the Med program is an excellent program, to quote. It is, and I'm very proud of it. I wrote the law that created the Shed the Meds program as a way to keep pharmaceuticals out of our water supply and, most importantly, to protect our young people.
Thank you. Moving on to health. Ms. Smitelli, this question starts with you. The end of federal cost sharing for health care in New York State will leave the state with a $925 million loss in health care funding. As a result, 700,000 New York State residents will need to have their health care costs supported by the state. What would you do to make this happen?
Well, right now there's a request for localities to fill in the gaps. And we're trying to move this, that if all of these unfunded mandates, such as Medicare, is brought to the localities, we just can't afford it. So it's got to be taken over by a state. If they make these requirements, they should be the ones paying it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Stern?
Yeah, and I get that because I've been on the other side of the table as a recipient of those unfunded state mandates and having to scramble and come up with millions of dollars and make some extremely difficult decisions that are tough to do. But that's why I support the New York Health Act, because the high cost of health care is literally bleeding all of us dry, and it is a tax on all of us that something's got to change. The status quo is really no longer acceptable. And so the New York Health Act will provide exactly that kind of relief, provide health care for those who need, but provide mandate relief to municipalities. It's also good for businesses. I mean, I'm a business owner, and as a business owner, I'm very concerned and always have to be concerned with providing health insurance to my employees. And on average, businesses spend about 13% of their revenue on health care costs. It's extremely difficult to survive as a small business in the first place. The cost of health care is a tax that has a detrimental impact on just about everything that we do. And so the New York Health Act would be a very positive way and make New York a leader in providing the care that is needed without placing the burden on the local municipalities.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Stern? What is your stand on universal health care for New York, Medicare for all type of thing?
Well, health care is something that I know a little bit about. In my role as an elder law attorney, I have had the privilege of representing my older neighbors and their families my entire professional career. It's something that I take great pride in. And so whether it's a conversation about Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, these are the issues that I really look forward to working on as our assemblyman. But universal health care is something that in order to work would ultimately have to be federal. But I support the New York Health Act because I think it's an important way for New York to take a leadership role, and if it's a model that can work, can be expanded to other states and ultimately across the country. But that's the ultimate direction that healthcare in this country needs to go in, because on its current course, it is simply unsustainable. Healthcare is the biggest driving expense, whether it's in government or in the private sector, and on its current course, it's just not sustainable.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Smitelli?
It's a mess. It's a mess. I pay close to $2,000 a month for health care for my family. It's insane. I never had to pay something like that. Close to $74 billion in Medicaid. Just insane, insane, insane. And it's on a collision course because there's too many rules, regulations, people involved. It's just been made a mess out of it. And it hasn't been that way before. And we really have to do something about it, and it has to be some smart decisions. And just making it universal, we're gonna cut down on our quality.
Okay, thank you. We continue with you. A follow-up question. Women's reproductive rights were not addressed in the last legislative session. What is your position on bringing New York state law into alignment with federal law by assuring women's access to abortion care?
Well, there has been a recodification of Roe v. Wade, my understanding. And also, this year, the Butler Amendment has been defeated once again, which was asking Medicaid to pay for abortions. And that's been defeated. I think that right now, it's a very hot topic. It's a very personal choice. Often there are no really great answers. It's a very religious choice. It takes a lot of personal reflection and prayer to make that decision. But with respect to New York, I believe that they have already taken a position with respect to that.
Mr. Stern?
No, New York needs to codify Roe v. Wade. We cannot have women in need of reproductive health care questioning whether or not they'll be able to exercise their right to choose. I am a strong supporter of women's reproductive health, a strong supporter of a woman's right to choose. I've been very proud in the past to have received the endorsement of Planned Parenthood for my strong support of a women's right. And so I think we do have a responsibility here in New York to protect those that we love and protect their right to make a very personal decision, which is a fundamental right that I strongly support. And I do think that we do need to be prepared here in New York for what may inevitably happen up at the Supreme Court. And I believe that we need to be proactive here in New York and not wait to see what's going to happen in the, hopefully never, but perhaps potentially the overturn of Roe v. Wade. That would be unacceptable. We need to be proactive in New York.
Thank you. Mr. Stern, what are your proposals for housing the homeless? The numbers are increasing throughout the state. What's the state's role, if any, and what thoughts might you suggest?
I think the state does have an important role to play, and I got to tell you, it's one of the things that I'm looking forward to most when I get there. It was my privilege in the legislature to serve all 12 years as the chairman of the Veterans and Seniors Committee. And so I had the opportunity to work with and for so many of our veterans coming home after 4, 5, 6 tours with so many challenges, TBI, PTSD, difficulty getting a job, running into problems with the law. And for so many, not having a place to call home was a daily challenge. I was very proud to have authored, it was a series of 4 separate bills. Cumulatively, I titled the Housing Our Homeless Heroes Act, which was Suffolk County's very aggressive effort in bringing an end to veteran homelessness. And essentially, it was a way, among other things, to take the zombie homes that were a blight on all of our communities across all of Suffolk County, and take those homes, partner with outstanding not-for-profit organizations, and rehab them and turn them into homes for our heroes and their families, whether it was transitional housing or ultimately permanent housing.
Thank you.
An extremely effective program that I'm very proud of, and that's what I'm looking to do up in Albany as well and take it statewide.
Thank you.
Homeless is a problem in Long Island. We have a home shortage on Long Island. It's very important for all citizens to be able to afford housing, and there's all different types of housing available. There are programs in place by a variety of organizations that are trying to combat this problem. With respect to veterans, there have been problems with housing even this past year. One of the main buildings at our local VA has had no heat. I mean, this is just a problem that we see all the time, and it's very important for us to be considerate of those that are looking for housing and to help these organizations that are providing this information and these opportunities to those of us that are less fortunate.
Okay, thank you. Also on housing, but related to the earlier tax discussion, most of the residents of this assembly district, as most of our neighboring districts, are going to be faced with continuing high property tax bills and an inability to deduct the full value if the code is actually enforced the way it looks like it's written. We talk about people leaving the state. I think most people would want to stay local, but cannot afford to keep their homes. What suggestions do you have? What role do you think New York State would play in having more of a range of housing choices, affordable workplace, smaller footprint housing so that seniors can afford to stay and working parents can afford to stay?
Well, the general property fund tax that we have is only one little part of our total tax bill, and an extremely small part. And what's a problem for seniors and those with limited incomes and those working in minimum wage jobs or underpaid jobs is that there should be in place some tax relief offered for them. And there are some proposed legislation out there in the state that I hope will get some notoriety and will get some coverage and may even be passed soon with respect to tax abatements for that reason.
Mr. Stern?
Yeah, first of all, the way to reduce the property tax burden, particularly for our older neighbors, is getting our fair share from Albany. We send, as a region, about $5 billion more up to Albany than we get back. That dollar amount is enough to fund all of Suffolk County government and about half of Nassau counties as well. And that should be unacceptable to all of us. We get our fair share, or even a fraction of our fair share, and you would see some pretty dramatic property tax relief. But affordable housing, whether it's for our young people, workforce housing, next generation housing for our young people, or even next generation housing for our older neighbors, depends on the ability to build and create those kinds of development projects. You can't have those projects, and you can't protect our environment, and you can't have the kind of economic development that we want unless you have the infrastructure to serve it. And in this area, that means sewer infrastructure. In Suffolk County, only 30% of our landmass is sewered at this point. And so you can't have those kinds of developments unless you create the sewer infrastructure to serve it. That is the role of the state.
Thank you. Final one on housing and physical infrastructure. Can you comment on the proliferation of empty storefronts, the challenges to retail, Amazon, Whole Foods, on and on. New retailers are not coming in to fill those spaces. We talked about zombie homes. We talked about the need for different types of housing. How would you knit this together into something that will recreate our vibrancy in our community? And Mr. Stern, that's yours.
Yeah, I'm very proud of my record when it comes to downtown revitalization. We've seen it in Huntington, we've seen it in Greenlawn, and there is a role for government to have a function there. And so working with community representatives, we would have a fund of resources to allocate to different projects throughout all of Suffolk County. And so you've seen the results. You've seen it in Huntington, you've seen it in Greenlawn here locally, you've seen it in areas like Patchogue and Sayville. Other up-and-coming areas, because we make a commitment to an area, and it is that commitment that pays real dividends. And so certainly we are in a changing world. The bookstore that I used to take my children to is no longer there. We're getting our deliveries of our reading material on our front porch, just like so many of our neighbors. Unfortunately, those times are changing. But that does not mean that we abandon our downtowns, which are such an important part, not just of our economy, but our local quality of life. That's the kind of commitment that we've made, and there certainly is, again, a state role to be played there as well.
Thank you. Ms. Smitelli?
Well, I'm seeing more and more stores that are vacant, such as the Toys R Us, such as the Sears, such as a lot of the stores in Wyandanch Rising. I mean, we're just not seeing the stores being filled because there's not enough incentive for these stores to either come into this area or to stay in this area. What we're seeing is incentives for new build. There's not any more room to new build. We have to have incentives in place to keep our stores there, such as incentives for businesses to keep running. And businesses are faced with a lot of challenges today with respect to internet sales. And a lot of them that are thriving today are changing and being receptive to the new needs and the new desires of our consumers, such as having online stores and things such as that. And with respect to sewer infrastructure, we've got to keep that money in sewers. We can't just keep either bonding it or sending it out or utilizing it for other reasons.
Okay, thank you. The next question is about the internet. I have actually personally, through the league, been trying to get an answer to a question for 2 years, and I cannot seem to get an answer, so I'm hoping both of you can answer it. In New York State, there is money coming to the State Department of Taxation for internet retail purchases made by residents of New York State. Does it all stay in Albany? Does some of it come back to the local areas? And if you don't know, which I understand because I can't find out, how would one go and find out? I read an article that local taxes aren't collected, only state, or possibly it all sits up in Albany. Because that's a big chunk of change that could help in many things too. So,
In Sherwood, a lot of times what happens is that money that is collected, they say it goes to one thing and then it ends up going somewhere else. So, and they do make this very difficult for your average person to find out. And that's one of the problems I said, which prompted me to embark in this endeavor years ago, and that is to find out where this stuff goes. Because there are a lot of times where I've tried to find something out, I've called local representatives, I've written FOIL requests, and I get nowhere. And that's the problem we're having. The problem is transparency. And when it's not transparent, then it's open for abuse.
thank you. Mr. Stern?
Yeah, I think in many ways it is a question of transparency because Suffolk County businesses will collect sales tax revenue. It goes up to Albany and ultimately it gets washed and comes back. And so, many times it is difficult to determine when the money is owed and how it's owed and in what form it's owed. Sometimes it comes in on time, sometimes it doesn't, and it makes it very difficult to budget. So yeah, it is a question of transparency, and ultimately there's a controller's report. The controller speaks to the controller, and then ultimately it goes like this. And again, that does not make for easy budgeting. And so yeah, there does need to be a clear indication of sales tax revenue that's received by internet and to receive a proper accounting for that as it goes down to the local municipalities.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple of individual issue questions that are interesting, and I'd like to hear your take on these. Mr. Stern, you're first on this one. What new ideas would you bring to Albany to address the challenges facing the Long Island Railroad and the New York City subway system?
Well, I'll tell you one idea that I would not have, and that's sticking more hands in the pockets of local Long Islanders who are just trying to get to work and put in a hard day's work for a hard day's pay. This, again, is a question of getting our fair share. Billions of dollars come out of our local Long Island region, go up to Albany, never to be seen again. And that is unacceptable. Just a fraction of the $5 billion every year that this region sends up to Albany coming back would have a tremendous impact on improving the quality of the MTA and the Long Island Railroad. There isn't a day these days where there isn't some kind of a delay causing people to be late to or missing work altogether. That should be unacceptable to all of us. And so, as a Long Island representative, someone who knows how difficult it is to budget to meet the needs of our local constituency, I look forward to going up to Albany and making sure that we get our fair share.
Thank you. Ms. Smitelli?
There's a small percentage of us who use the railroad every day, yet we are paying an exorbitant MTA tax. We are paying for the recent improvement of trains and subways that we're hearing all about. Where's the money for the roads? There's not that much coming in if you look at the budget today for roads, and that's where most of us are getting to our places in Suffolk County. So there is a disparity, and that's something that has to be brought to the attention of those in Albany. That's something that we must insist upon, is they want to divert all this money towards New York City and New York City programs. And of course that is important, and our transportation system is important, but so are our roads, so is our infrastructure, so is our area. We're very important, and we're extremely important to us in the room.
Thank you. Ms. Smitelli, this one starts with you. What's your stance on the DREAMER Act that Speaker Carl Heastie proposed in the Assembly this February?
I am not a proponent of the DREAM Act because I feel that the TAP program and other assistance that's afforded to students should be enhanced. I think it's very important for our young students, and I know many who are crippled with debt coming out of college. There are some in this room that can talk about over $100,000 in debt for college. We're pushing many children into colleges, into private and very costly higher education, and it's just not working. What we have to do is we have to give them realistic goals, we have to give them help, and it has to come to as many students as we can that live here, that work here. We have to help our students.
Thank you. Mr. Stern?
Well, I think that's really the point here, is that we do have a generation of young people that we are losing to crushing debt. These are young people that are not participating in the economy. They're not buying homes. They're not going out shopping. They're not able to go to a restaurant every night because of this crushing debt. And I think that's the point here. And we're talking about young people who are here through no fault of their own. And we can talk about immigration policy all night long. But the fact is that with a failure of the federal government, we have now a new generation of young people who have, for every other purpose, grown up as Americans, and one way or another have gotten to a point, probably defying many odds, the ability to go to school. Education is the best investment that we can possibly make as a community. It is pound for pound, dollar for dollar, the best investment that we can make. And we can't sit here and say that we want to fight MS-13 if we're just going to turn our young people out to the streets rather than giving them the opportunity to be a part of our system, be a part of the process, go to school, and then we all benefit from that economic activity.
Thank you. Mr. Stern? The question is, how should New York State address its mental health issues for its citizens? Should there be universal mental health coverage, care for all New Yorkers? We know that in many criminal arraignments, even, people end up in jail, and there's a vast number that are suffering from mental illness.
Yeah. Yeah, in my career, my professional career as an elder law attorney, a good portion of what I would spend my time on is working with families who have loved ones with special needs. And special needs come in all varieties. And so, first of all, I would say that all of our children deserve every opportunity to reach his or her full potential. And mental health, we also know, unfortunately, is a glaring crater of a problem, particularly as we're seeing, so many suicides, we're seeing so many drug overdoses, and yeah, unfortunately, we're seeing too many instances of gun violence. And so, yes, I do believe that mental health, comprehensive mental health, does need to be a part of the insurance system, here in New York and across the country. It is really, I think, a shame that we look at physical incapacity very differently than we do mental incapacity. Physical incapacity, there are tremendous challenges there depending on the situation, but mental incapacity, as we've seen, although, look, most with mental challenges are not violent, but at the same time, it is a part of the challenge that we're seeing here and does need to be addressed within our insurance system.
Thank you. Ms. Smitelli?
Sure. Unfortunately, I do have a niece and a nephew that have special needs, and I understand the challenges that have been facing my sister and my brother-in-law their whole life. There are programs that are in place that are assisting them. There is more that needs to be done. Mental health is a disease, just like any other disease. There's medication that's needed, and there's a balance that has to be reached. I don't think anybody's singling that out, but that goes along with all the other needs that someone has, some health needs.
Okay, thank you. Continuing with you, given the terrible financial standing of Suffolk County and the state, why would voters have confidence in you to improve the fiscal situation? And that really is for both of you, because you're coming in this new.
Well, thank you for saying that.
Yes, both of you. So let me slightly rephrase the question, because I didn't catch the implication in here, which is not the way we asked them. Basically, Suffolk County is already in bad shape, and we know this, and that's a whole different ballgame from the state. The state looks like it's going to be shakier and shakier because of the new tax laws, because of federal unfunded mandates, lots of situations. So what do you see happening with the state budget in ways that won't fall apart for those that are here and just result in increasing taxation?
Well, the county is broke. The county has been robbing Peter to pay Paul. The state is also in absolutely horrible condition, and what we have to do is make tough decisions. And what I can bring to the table is I have been a negotiator for many years. I am the type of person that steps back, looks at the whole picture, analyzes the whole picture, sees where we can consolidate, sees where we can cut, and some of those cuts are not going to be pretty, but they have to be done. We have to get our house in order. If someone wants to buy something new in their house, they look at their budget, they see if they can afford it. If they can't afford it, they must do without. Or they have to restructure what they have, or they have to consolidate, or they have to do without. And these are things that I'm looking forward to doing. I'm very passionate about this. This is not something I've just suddenly woke up and decided to do. This is something that I've been working for my whole life. I've had a lot of experience in negotiation, in crossing over to other parties, in trying to come to a right resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stern?
Yeah, the county certainly has tremendous challenges. And I've been there, and I've been at that table. And I can tell you, my colleagues who are here this evening will tell you, that we were faced with very, very difficult decisions in making sure that we can maintain essential services while protecting our taxpayers. I'm very proud of the fact that even given the challenges, that over 12 years there was 0 increase in general fund property taxes. Protecting our taxpayer was always the top priority, and the only increases along the way were for law enforcement. And I'll make that decision every single time to make sure that our law enforcement professionals have the resources that they need. And by the way, we always consistently did it under the tax cap, providing fiscal responsibility along the way. But I'll tell you, given our challenges and given the state challenges and the interplay between the county and the state, I'm exactly the person that you want going up to Albany to represent our local interests. I know exactly the kind of money that we should be getting as a part of our fair share coming back to be able to assist us with our local needs here at home.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. Stern, New York State voter turnout is among the lowest in the nation. Other states have increased voter turnout by allowing early voting, same-day registration, and no excuse absentee ballots. What legislation would you propose to increase voter participation?
Well, first of all, I know that there are a lot of my neighbors that are angry. I'm angry too when I turn on the TV and I see what's happening down in Washington and up in Albany. But the best way to exercise that anger and to exercise that voice is by voting. And it is abysmal that in 2016, New York ranked 41st in the country in voter participation. And so we have to make voting easier. 34 states throughout the country provide for early voting. The single-day voting mechanism that we have here in the state of New York is archaic. And so whether it's instant registration, automatic registration, whether it is early voting, I actually support the idea of weekend voting, so that whether you are someone who's coming back after a hard day's work, or if you're a mom having to put the kids to bed and help with homework, if you are a member of the community of color, if you're a senior citizen, someone with disabilities, you have to be able to vote and participate in the process and make your voice heard.
Thank you. Ms. Smitelli?
There is what's called an absentee voter application. And if you are unable to vote, you can fill out an absentee voter application and you can vote. If you have the certain restrictions to voting lifted, you're increasing the likelihood of people tampering with that, people voting more than once, people that aren't supposed to be voting, people gathering up people and taking them there instead of people getting out to vote. It's very important to vote. I make no mistake about that. If you don't vote, you shouldn't complain. All people in this room are people that are very interested and think that this is a very important area. The people that don't vote, you can make it as easily as possible for them. They won't do it. And what's so sad is that these are the people that sometimes complain the loudest. And I turn around and say, you want a change, you better get out there and get involved in your local politics. You better get out there and vote. Making it on the weekends, you're still not going to get people to come in and vote. Making the absentee voter registration longer or closer in time, it's still not going to help. You got to get your neighbors out to vote. You got to get young people involved, and they're involved right now with the gun and school safety issue. But I'm still going out to house and house and house and saying, okay, are you going to vote? Well, I'm not registered. Well, get there and register. So there's got to be more education, more people at home saying it's important to vote. Making it easier just increases, I think, a potential for abuse.
Thank you. Ms. Smitelli, do you support reforms that limit corporate or other special interest influence? Be specific in what you would support or sponsor.
You betcha. You betcha. There are discretionary funds, and those that are in charge in the state of allocating these discretionary funds are those that can accept money from public interest groups or political interest groups or lobbyists. And this has got to stop. We got to find out who's funding what and why. Political corruption is just across the board, and it's abominable. It really is. Just look at the newspaper, and this is something that's got to stop. And as I go back to transparency, that's what we need. We need diversity in government. We need those that are in charge to own up to where this money is going. We can't have these backroom deals. And the way to insist on that and the way to ensure that happening is more diversity, more balance of power, and more people watching what's going on, and that's what we have to do.
Thank you. Mr. Stern?
It's very disappointing when you pick up a news day and you read more stories about arrested elected officials than you do about jet wins. The corruption is due to the money in politics. And you get the money out and you rid politics of corruption. In the legislature, I'm very proud of the fact that I actually helped draft our ethics reform laws and develop a new ethics code as a model for other jurisdictions to follow. I'm very proud of the fact that we have developed in Suffolk County a leading model to take the money out of politics with a public financing mechanism for campaigns going forward in the future, and I believe that that's something that the League actually supported as well, and I was proud to support it too. But the bottom line here is that we have to have a system where elected officials, those running for office, believe and rules in place where they're going to find it's better to spend more time with their constituents than in a jail cell.
Thank you. Mr. Stern, do you endorse term limits? There aren't any in place for the Assembly and Senate.
Yep.
And with so many, it says local and state politicos are now in jail for corruption, etc. Does power corrupt?
Yep. I don't know if there's anybody better to speak on term limits than me. And having said that, I have always been a strong supporter of term limits at every level. I believe that term limits makes for a more dynamic government. I was pleased to have the opportunity to serve for 12 years, but I can tell you this from experience. You come in, you know you want to accomplish good things, you're on the clock. And so if you have the privilege of being elected and then being re-elected, you know that you're only there for a finite period of time. So if you want to accomplish things for your community, if you want to put points up on the board, you know you have to get it done because you're not going to be there forever. I think it makes, as I said, for a more dynamic level of government. I've had the opportunity to serve in the Suffolk County Legislature, not just with one representative from each of the other districts, but several representatives coming in and out. And I think that makes us a better level of government. So you can debate it all night long, but my personal perspective is that I've seen that it works, it could work well, and it's something that I strongly support and would do so at the state level as well.
Thank you. Ms. Smitelli?
Term limits means that you serve your term and you should go back and serve your community afterwards. Term limits means that you have a finite number of years to serve or be in government. Term limits does not mean that you should serve one term and then move on to serve another term elsewhere.
Okay, thank you. Red card. Okay.
Well, look, I'm proud of my record, and I hope I've been able to convey how proud I am of that record this evening. And as I said, I'm supportive of term limits, but I got to tell you, as someone who helped write the ethics rules for Suffolk County, as someone who has enacted campaign reform, as someone who has refused the perks of office, taking a freeze in salary, denying the phones, denying the cars, leading by example. I'm exactly the guy you want in Albany. I am exactly what we hope for, being able to accomplish at a lower level of government, utilizing that experience and taking it up, if he or she deserves to, have the support of his or her community to go and accomplish things at the next level. With my experience in healthcare, with my experience in sewer infrastructure, two critically important issues to us here locally, as long as there are taxpayers to be protected and an environment to be preserved, as long as there are veterans to be housed, I'm going to be there delivering results for my community.
Thank you. Okay, it's time for the wrap-up. So you have, should we give them 2 minutes? Yes. Two. Okay. So one other question I did ask was, what are your skills? Why are you the one? that people should vote for. You started with that in the beginning in the opening statements, both of you. You've made reference to it throughout. But if you could give us, and Ms. Smitelli, you would start on this?
You want me to start?
You can go up to 2 minutes, yes. If you'd like to stand, you can stand.
Okay, thank you.
This is the close, yes.
Close.
And just make sure you talk into the mic.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm speaking again first. People are talking about their background, their experience, their level. You know, you've got to look and you've got to say to yourself, who is going to be the best in Albany at this time for this job? I clearly think I am. I clearly think that I'm bringing a passion, I'm bringing experience, I'm bringing an outsider's view, I'm bringing someone that has lived in this community for a long time, that has a pulse on this, that has been to all the civic groups that are in this area, at least, you know, listening to what the problems are. Mr. Stern is talking about his record. I would like you to take a look at his record for 12 years. 12 years. Not just what he's done for 1 year, but what he's done for 12 years in county legislator. I think it's very important for you to look at who is the one that's going to bring the most to the table, who is the one that is going to work across the party lines and get things done, who has passion for this, who has given up a lot to go this route and to do this. This is not the easiest thing to do for someone. And this is not something that I've done every day. But this is something I feel real strongly about. I feel it's very important to have diversity in government, to have all different types of people going to Albany to state what their concerns are and to fight for the citizens of this district. I firmly believe that when you look at someone's record, you must look at the totality, not just what they say, but what they don't say. What is the total tax picture? Who has voted for increases in taxes for 12 years? Who has said, well, the general fund property tax is the one that hasn't been touched? Well, that's only $50 million out of our $3 billion tax base right now. So, you know, it's very important to look at everything. Not just, oh, well, this one's been in public office, so we should just vote for them. If that's the way you feel, then term limits is not for you. Then why don't you just, elect somebody in their early 20s and keep them in office forever?
Okay,
I think it's
please,
very
Thomas.
important to give everyone a chance to look at their record, to look at what they're bringing to the table. I thank you very much.
Up to 2 minutes, Mr. Stern?
Yes, thank you. Well, when you talk about what one, how did you put it, brings to the table, the passion that one brings, the experience that one has had, I hope that I've been clear in pointing to each one of those during the course of my entire 12-year career in serving our community. I've been elected and re-elected 6 times, and I'm very proud of that. But there's a reason why I've been elected and re-elected 6 times, and that's because whether it's been me or my outstanding staff that I'm so proud of, we've consistently delivered for our neighbors with real, meaningful results, and have had the opportunity to draft and pass legislative initiatives, as I said in my opening statement, that literally were their first of their kind in New York State and even first of the nation, setting examples for other jurisdictions to follow. It's a record that I'm very, very proud of, all 12 years of it. But I gotta tell you, what I'm most proud of, and I think my staff was as well, was our accessible, responsive leadership that really had such a meaningful impact on so many. For example, dear Legislator Stern, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for all of your help. I just learned that my mother's home care assistance will be restored. She's 92 with dementia, and I'm her only caregiver. This assistance will ensure her safety and give me some rest and peace of mind. It would not have happened without you. It's wonderful to know that I have a public official who truly cares. That's why I'm running for the New York State Assembly, and I hope to have your support on April 24th. Thank you.
I want to thank both of you for dealing with the quick and very diverse questions. I think everyone in the room heard a lot. There's a lot to consider. Assembly does matter. You know, a lot of people don't understand those levels of government, and there's tremendous potential. And again, we appreciate your coming. Diane Slavin, the League of Women Voters of Huntington Voter Service Chair, thank you. Colette, thank you. And the Greater Huntington Town of Huntington Chamber of Commerce, thank you for coming.